What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. You know, I'm infatuated with MSNBC. I love watching these crackpots over there. And, you know, Lawrence O'Donnell is quite insane. He's a freaking lunatic. He just loses me all the time, constantly, and I am utterly shocked on a constant basis as to how much of a crackpot this guy actually is. He does not understand what a euphemism is, folks.
Donald Trump is obviously not a mango guy, so he mumbled his way through an interview about eating tariffs without mentioning any food products that actually can be eaten.
It'll raise prices on everything from electronics to clothing to building houses.
You don't know that. You don't know whether or not China's going to eat it.
That's mathematics.
China probably will eat those tariffs.
Remember when Donald Trump on the campaign trail said, China will probably eat the tariffs? No, you don't, because he never said that.
We're going to be a tariff nation. It's not going to be a cost to you. It's going to be a cost to another country. I heard Kamala the other day, Comrade Kamala, she said, oh, if you do that, he's raising your taxes. No, no, no. I'm not raising your taxes. I'm raising China and all of these countries in Asia and all over the world.
Imagine if any country could actually raise the taxes in another country. What Donald Trump appears to mean, and what Howard Lutnick appears to mean, is that Chinese exporters will lower the price by the amount of the tariff, which, in China's case, is 145%. So a $100 product exported from China will somehow still cost $100 in the United States because the producer of that product in China is going to reduce the export price on a $100 item by $145. So if you're trying to do that math in your head, you can stop now. It's impossible.
Okay, he fundamentally doesn't understand how tariffs work, as a matter of fact. You don't reduce the export price, my guy. You absorb the tariff. You pay that 145%. But of course, let's be realistic. China is not going to pay 145%. All these companies, in other words, they're not going to pay that 145% tariff. So what does that mean, folks? They're either A, not going to ship items to the United States, or B, the price of those goods are going to go up, right? That's where the tax on you comes in, but not necessarily. Now, if the tariff was, you know, for maybe 10%, yeah, they'd probably absorb most of that. And that's why Donald Trump has issued 10% tariffs for a lot of different countries, because a lot of those companies, they're probably going to absorb most of that. They're not going to completely shift that tariff onto the American consumer. Actually, that's what's going to happen. Probably. Now, we're not 100% sure on that, but that's probably what's going to happen, you know, given the market, given the product, given whatever's going on. All right, some products may go up, sure, that's going to happen, as a matter of fact. But, you know, China's not going to pay 145% in tariffs. You know, these companies, in other words, they're not going to do that. That's just way too much to try to absorb. And what he's trying to do is trying to make you think that what Donald Trump is doing is stupid. But I think what he is doing is even more stupid. Get a load of what he does right here.
That the only money that is going to flow into the United States Treasury from tariffs will come from Americans in America and no one else. It is legally and technically impossible for tariff revenue to be paid by anyone outside of the United States. It's impossible. No tariff money has ever flowed into the United States Treasury from another country. Only from the ports receiving products in the United States.
Okay, for the keen eye observer, people that pay attention, which I imagine you guys, because you guys are the best, you guys pay attention. What the hell did he just say right there? He just contradicted himself, as a matter of fact. Because yes, he is right. Yeah, the last part of that is correct. It comes from the port. That's where they have to pay the tariff when those products come into the country. That's not coming from you. Now, the importer has to pay whatever company, the distributor, who pays blah, blah, blah. So, in other words, that tariff isn't necessarily transferred onto you. they can choose to absorb that tariff. Once again, depending on the market, depending on blah, blah, blah. I'm just tired of these people just like lying outright for political means. In other words, they're not telling you the entire truth, right? These tariffs are paid upon these products landing in the United States. That means you don't pay it immediately. Sure, the price of the product may go up. It may not go up, though. But they don't tell you this, and this is what I'm sick and freaking tired of. These people just lying constantly about the tariffs. Not, completely misunderstanding the tariffs. As a matter of fact, that segment, he goes on to call a guy with a PhD in economics stupid. Right? Get this. A guy that went to journalism school talking about economics, calling another guy who has a PhD in economics stupid on the topic of economics. I thought we had an appeal to an authority in this country, but these people, if it's Trump, we don't appeal to that authority whatsoever. Even if it's an expert, we don't listen to them. They're just wrong. They're dead wrong, regardless if they're right or not. Does not matter. And I find that hilarious. But now, in a hard shift, check this out, y'all. Fresno judge bars Border Patrol from some warrantless arrests of suspected undocumented residents. You love how they put that in there, residents. I'm sorry. This is some of the most scumbaggery nonsense I think I've ever heard in my entire life. The corporate press are scumbags for this, because what this does from the headline is implant the thought into your head that these people, they're just residents. They're just people going about their daily lives. They go to work. They have a job. They have a wife and kids, white picket fence. They have a house, blah, blah, blah. As a matter of fact, they were at the bar last week talking to your neighbor, shooting the ish, if you will. That's what that says. Right there. They're residents. Yeah, living in the country illegally. They came into this country illegally. So, barring the rest of that, notwithstanding all that other stuff that we just mentioned, that, hang on, a federal judge just put on hold Donald Trump's deportation efforts. That's all deportations. Not really, but that pretty much stops the administration from deporting new criminal aliens. It is completely insane. These people have lost their freaking minds. They really have. Let's get into this, because this is a fascinating article. And I would just love to know who these judges are. Once again, I really hope, and this is going to sound really partisan here, but from all the news that I've been reading lately, this is the only conclusion or the only solution I could come up with, is that the Trump administration, the FBI, as a matter of fact, needs to start investigating every single federal judge to make sure that these people are not working with criminal foreign gangs, terrorist organizations like Tren de Aragua, MS-13, considering the fact that a Wisconsin judge and a New Mexico judge were just caught harboring and abetting, sorry, I said abating, I don't know why I said that, but abetting criminal aliens. As a matter of fact, MS-13 or Tren de Aragua gang members. That is some of the most insane news I think I've heard in my entire life. And that is not pedantic. It's not semantic. That is what happened. A federal judge whisked away through a back door a criminal alien so that criminal alien would not be detained by ICE. First of all, the judge would not allow the ICE agents inside the courtroom. Look, I get that one. That's totally normal. That's federal agencies. Sure, fine, whatever. That's law enforcement, essentially. I get it. But to take a criminal alien that's about to get detained by ICE to get deported and whisk him through the back door so he can escape, right? And it wasn't just that, it's just some random criminal alien. He was in court for a reason, folks. This guy mercilessly beat, I believe it was a woman, half to death. The victim was in the courtroom. completely insane. That's why I say Democrats are evil for siding with criminals, oversighting for the victim. Like, seriously, folks, I know we talk about doom and gloom a lot around here, and like I talked about yesterday with, the culture that we're living in is crumbling before our eyes when we have federal judges, these judges, they're supposed to be some of the best, right? Some really good people. Come to find out, speaking of that, with a quick aside, I heard a story. I haven't confirmed any of this, so take it with a grain of salt, right? Apparently, the Trump administration is putting under investigation a citizen. They are a citizen, but Biden apparently made a brand new citizen that had only become a citizen 4 months prior a federal judge. That is right. So this guy had been a citizen for 4 freaking months. Joe Biden made him a federal judge. That's insane. That is outright insane. You might think, well, that might not be that insane. The guy had only been a citizen for 4 months. And to think that Tren de Aragua, MS-13, these terrorist organizations, think about this. Think how they've infiltrated, like, the Mexican government, the Venezuelan government, all these other third world nation governments. They've infiltrated their governments. They've infiltrated the military, the law enforcement. I mean, this is common knowledge, right? Think about that for a second, okay? Don't you think they're not going to try to do that within the United States? I think this guy should be disbarred. Can't remove him from the country because apparently he's a U.S. citizen. However, I think there needs to be some sort of requirement that any of these high-level positions, you must be a native-born American citizen. This is getting out of hand, folks. We already allow you could become a citizen and run for Congress and go represent American citizens in your. It's insane what we allow in this country, folks. A lot of people don't know this. It's insane. Now, I know that might be a harsh take, but once again, folks, let's get into this because I've been ranting for a good minute. A federal judge in Fresno has barred Border Patrol agents from arresting someone suspected of living in the U.S. illegally unless they have a warrant or a reason to believe the person might flee before a warrant can be obtained following a local raid in January. This is insane. This is going to grind to a halt Donald Trump's mass deportation operations in this area. Now, this isn't a nationwide injunction. I think this lady might have a little bit of brains left in her head and said, yeah, I can't do this on a nationwide level. As a matter of fact, but it wouldn't put me. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if she tried to do this at all. I would not be surprised at all. That is insane. Got to have a freaking warrant? Are you freaking kidding me? Now, sure, these people are nuts. Tuesday's ruling from U.S. District Judge Jennifer L. Thurston also says Border Patrol agents can't stop people without having reasonable suspicion or return them to their countries of origin via voluntary departure unless that person is informed of their rights and agrees to leave. That's also insane. Of course these people are going to have their Miranda rights read to them or whatever Miranda rights criminal aliens get. She's saying that even if they volunteer, if you don't know about your rights, which you don't have much rights as a criminal alien, as a matter of fact, you don't have much at all. Because why? You're not supposed to be in this country, folks. But that is insane. It's just completely, divorced from reality. Like, what world do these people live in where they think somebody can come into the country undetected and just get to live out their lives as if they're a regular citizen? What in the world makes these people think it's okay for companies in the United States to hire somebody that doesn't have a Social Security number, that doesn't pay into taxes, that doesn't provide, pay into the same systems that you and I have to pay for, but yet they benefit from those very systems, as a matter of fact? Yeah, they benefit from those systems. These criminal aliens are getting Medicare, Medicaid. They get subsidized, for crying out loud, their daily needs in some cases if they can't find a job, which they shouldn't have a job in the first place. It should be illegal for any company in this country to hire somebody that doesn't have authorization, in other words, to work in this country. Criminal aliens, to be specific. Because, it's easy to not be a citizen, go get a visa, and get a job, get a social security number, pay into taxes, and do all that stuff. That is very easy to do. It's not that hard. Fill out an application and wait. That's all that takes. But these people, they don't care about doing that. This story is just blows my freaking mind, y'all. And like I said, I read a lot of news. So it's hard to blow my mind. I know I say blow my mind every day, but that's just, semantic for ending the video, if you will. The ruling only applies to people within the court's Eastern District of California, which includes Fresno, Bakersfield, Sacramento, and extends to the Oregon border. 78 people were swept up in January after the Border Patrol launched an immigration enforcement action dubbed Operation Return to Sender in the Bakersfield area. The American Civil Liberties Union sued Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem and U.S. Border Patrol officials on behalf of the labor union United Farm Workers and people who were targeted during the Border Patrol raids. There is a workers' union out there that is solely meant for people that are in the country illegally. That is absurd. Why does that even exist, folks? The ACLU said Border Patrol agents spent nearly a week unconstitutionally detaining people who appeared to be farm workers or day laborers, regardless of their actual immigration status or individual circumstances. Now, to say that is unconstitutional, that is a lie. These people are lying. That's the ACLU. That's what they're claiming, though. But, once again, if everything was fair, the corporate press in this instance would say that the ACLU said that without evidence, because they didn't offer any evidence that, the Homeland Security, Border Patrol agents were going around and just, detaining people unconstitutionally. You have zero constitutional rights if you come into this country illegally. You have zero. None whatsoever. You don't. If you claim asylum, that changes the game drastically, as a matter of fact. But I'm just saying, you don't have any rights at all. You get removed expeditiously. It is insane that these people think that everybody that breaks into our country, essentially, they get their day in court. I'm sorry. And I ain't gonna lie, the corporate press has done a pretty good job of planting the seed of that idea into people's brains. Because a lot of people think that. I did, for crying out loud. Until I went and actually read the Constitution. I read the code around immigration and found out, hang on just a second. You don't get those rights. You don't get hardly any rights at all. You get the right to be treated fairly, and then you get the right to be given a ride home. Think about that for a second, folks. We are offering these people a ride home, and Democrats are losing their freaking minds over it, because these people don't get to go in court and plead their case as to why they're in the country without any paperwork that authorizes them to be in the country. Like, what are you arguing for? Seriously, I keep on making this case, but people just don't seem to understand. What are we arguing in court? You've got to make a legal argument when you break the law and come into our country unauthorized. There is no legal argument to keep you in this country, folks. Get that through your brain for a second. Get that corporate press narrative out of your head, because it's just not true. It absolutely is just a falsehood perpetrated by the corporate press and Democrats, and in some cases, Republicans, because They just go right along with it. They either don't know or they don't care to read the Constitution, for crying out loud. The detainees were bused to the border, held without any way to contact family or attorneys, and coerced into signing papers that said they had waived their right to see an immigration judge and voluntarily agreed to leave the country, the ACLU said. That's a bunch of nonsense drivel. That is all made up. They said that without evidence, folks. They don't get to waive their right to an immigration judge. They have no right to an immigration judge. Once again, folks, that is only for people that are asylum seekers and people that come in on a work visa, a green card, whatever it may be. Whatever legal documentation. That's the only people that have rights to immigration judges. It's insane. The evidence before the court is that Border Patrol agents under DHS authority engaged in conduct that violated well-established constitutional rights, Thurston wrote. Not true. But, the judge said that without evidence. She said the Border Patrol would have to provide a report showing exactly who is detained or arrested without warrants and why every 60 days until the lawsuit is concluded. That is one of the most insane rulings I think I've heard in my entire life. Think about this timeline we're living in, folks, where we've had unprecedented historical action after unprecedented historical action for a freaking year now. Attorneys for the Border Patrol had argued the judge lacked jurisdiction to consider the case because federal law says that immigration matters can generally only be appealed once an immigration judge has issued a final order. Attorneys from the Justice Department told the judge in Fresno on Monday that the case should be moot and said placing conditions on immigration enforcement would burden the government. That is right. It'll pretty much hamstring all their deportation operations. But this is what this is meant to do. As a matter of fact, these people want these criminals in the country. They don't want you to call them criminals. I don't know. We're getting this narrative also that a lot of Democrats they're trying to make the argument that it's a civil violation. It's not criminal. Well, hang on just a second. Don't you guys remember in the 2019 presidential primary, one of the debate moderators asked the panel, would you make crossing the border illegally a civil infraction versus a criminal infraction? And every single one of those presidential nominees raised their hand. Yeah, you want to try to make that argument again? Get your arguments correct, left. But Thurston said the Border Patrol can't claim the lawsuit as moot simply because it issued a new policy after it was sued. The language in the new policy isn't strong enough to guard against the illegal stops, Thurston said, and there is no reason to believe that the policy wouldn't be changed again in the future. The judge's ruling against the government comes on the president's 100th day in office. Sorry about that. I got tongue-tied for a second. Now, what that fails to tell you also is that one of the arguments from the government is that recently the government has made policy changes to state that whatever she said right there. Let me go back and read it because I want to get it right, the language in the new policy. Well, I'm sorry, I couldn't find it in that article. It expressed the policy changes on a totally different article, and I can't seem to find it now for some reason. I'm not sure what it was. I had to pause for a second and go look this information up right quick, but I couldn't find it. But basically, they changed their policy to make this entire argument moot. And the judge said, well, that's not good enough because you could just change policy later. I agree with that. Just outright, she's right on that. Seriously, like they could just change policy later. But look, that doesn't stop this entire argument here is ridiculous. Do you really need a warrant? Are you freaking kidding me? That means that anytime you go to arrest a criminal alien, that means you would have to go to a judge and give reasons why you suspect them of being a criminal alien. Now, by God, we know how law enforcement works. They can just make up any reason that they want to. Sure. But that is still absurd. So you get to break into a country illegally, go in and do whatever you want, and then you have to have the law enforcement for you to be detained. They have to go and talk to a judge first. How insane is that? I don't know what is going on in this country, but it seriously, a lot of people are calling it a judicial coup d'etat. And that's exactly what it appears to be, because these judges are losing their freaking minds over this. They are making these rulings that are blatantly out of alignment with U.S. law, out of alignment with the Constitution, and make absolutely no freaking sense. And what puzzles me is, once again, like I always say, I always try to make the arguments what they're making as to why they are doing what they're doing. Before I come out here, I do all this in my head. And, they're not even making the argument here that, all this is to make sure we don't get United States citizens entangled up and deport U.S. citizens. That they don't have to go through the process of going to court and blah, 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 being detained by ICE, all that. They're not even making that argument. And to me, if that's the argument they're going to make, I'm kind of stuck, to be honest with you. It is hard to argue against that. But they're not making that argument, folks. They're making nonsense arguments that make absolutely no sense. Saying that, oh, you're violating their constitutional rights. If they are not of this country, if they are not legally authorized to be in this country, they do not fall under our jurisdiction, for crying out loud. They do not get the same civil rights that we get. It is insane what is going on here. And it, once again, folks, it consistently blows my mind that these judges are making these rulings like this. It really does. Like, how do they live with themselves, for crying out loud? Oh, we're standing up for the minority. You're standing up for mostly criminals. Right? I know that a lot of people want to make the argument, well, they're not really criminals. Well, law says otherwise. And look, I get it. I get what you're trying to say. They haven't come in and they haven't robbed a liquor store or, robbed somebody's purse or done anything like that. Look, I get that. I totally get that. That doesn't mean that they're not going to. We have standards in this country, folks. We absolutely do. But just because these people haven't done that doesn't mean that they're not capable of doing that. And if you want to live in a country where we can at least feel like we're safe from outside threats, then you're not going to stop these deportations. You don't want these people coming into the country, because there are several murders. There's hundreds of murders, as a matter of fact, that are perpetrated by criminal aliens that were 100% preventable if we would have had strong border security and deportations to get people that slip through the cracks, to get them out of the country before they could commit crimes. We already have enough criminals in this country alone. We don't need more pouring across our border and committing more crime, for crying out loud. It is insane to think that anybody could make an argument as to why these people deserve the same civil rights that you and I get, the same rights under the Constitution that you and I get. It's insane. Simply for the fact that these people choose to break our laws. They choose to come in undetected in some cases. I know under the Biden administration, they were just allowed to flow in. So they were just not detecting them because they weren't looking. You can't detect something if you're not attempting to detect them. But, these people just, they have a lever they can pull. There is a mechanism that they could go to a port of entry, request a visa, request a green card. They want to come in, they want to work. Blah, 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 blah. But they choose to not do this, folks. They choose to not do that. And when you choose to not play by the rules, why should we play by the rules? Why should you fall under the same rules as everybody else that is playing by the rules? You're playing by the rules. Do you think it's fair that somebody else gets to have those same rules imposed on them when they're not playing by those same rules, they are cheating the system. That is exactly what they're doing. And once again, folks, there's way too many actual criminals, actual cartel operations, criminal gang operations that flow across that southern border. Unfettered and unchecked. Not anymore, but it was. And those people, a lot of people, anywhere from 12 to 20 million people just under the Biden administration come across that southern border illegally. That is not to mention the people that came across legally. It's all crazy. And once again, folks, I always beg everybody, let me know what you think about all this down in the comment section. But, you know, a lot of times they don't leave comments, which I wish you guys would leave more comments. But, you know, look, I get it. I totally get it. But I've been rambling for a while, so y'all let me know what y'all think about all this. That's all I got. Y'all don't forget to smash that like button for me. Subscribe if you're new around here. I would greatly appreciate that. And y'all share this video anywhere and everywhere you can. And I want to say I appreciate you guys watching the video all the way to this end, to the end. I really do appreciate it. And y'all try to have a good day and stay legitical. Peace.